What separates a good anime from a great anime? Why do some animes stick with us long after we've watched it? Welcome to The Workshop.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kris.
And in this podcast, we discuss and deconstruct storytelling elements in some of our favorite animes.
Today in The Workshop, we will be discussing the 2016 romance fantasy film Your Name, aka Kimi no Nawa. It's happening, guys. We're doing it. This film was written and directed by Makoto Shinkai and was a major commercial success domestically in Japan as well as globally, receiving critical acclaim for its animation, writing, and soundtrack. It also became the highest-grossing anime film of all time, surpassing Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, which had held the spot previously for 15 years.
So here's the summary. Mitsuha and Taki are two very different people. Mitsuha is a high school student, a girl living in a small rural town, while Taki is a high school boy living in Tokyo. One day, they start mysteriously switching bodies, and they have to adapt to one another's lifestyles while continuing to communicate with one another through phone memos. The story revolves around their lives in relation to a comet that's expected to pass Earth during the Mid-Autumn Festival.
You know, my heart was beating so fast while we were doing that intro. I think because I was trying to keep it together. Because the intro is like the only part that we script.
Yeah.
Like we fully write out a script. And so like my heart was like, today in the workshop. Anyways, why don't we kick off the overall impressions?
Yes. Okay, so
deep breaths.
I'm going to start.
Yes.
I'm about to explain to everybody right now why this is my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
I forgot to give a spoiler alert, but, I think it's implied. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if the listeners know anything about Makoto Shinkai's history, but he's known for being, he's not very known for being a very good writer, director, artist, blah, blah, blah. So, I think that this Your Name was very much a product of a lot of trial and error, development. Now, one of the other works that he's so very well known for is Garden of Words. I don't know if you've ever watched it or at least heard of it.
I've heard of it and I have seen portions of it.
Okay. So Garden of Words is hailed for being a very, very beautiful film, but the writing for it is a little bit lackluster in that it's very much just about the atmosphere, and it's just very heartwarming to see a writer and artist and director who is just like the product of somebody who has been just evolving and continuously trying to learn from his old mistakes to create something that is very beautiful. And so I think the idea of Your Name coming from this creator who is just as imperfect as anybody else really speaks to me. So that's kind of the first thing. So Your Name is very much a representation of how Shinkai respects and appreciates just beauty in general. One of the most key moments in this movie for me was actually right at the very beginning. I really like the beginning of this movie.
So do I, yes.
Because it starts off with this beautiful shot of the comet that this entire movie revolves around, traveling across the sky, and the line that accompanies that scene is nothing more than a beautiful view. And I think that sometimes we get very especially us, we get very caught up in what does this mean? What is the significance of that? What could this be trying to imply? What are the undertones? But sometimes I think that it's okay to like something just because it evokes some sort of vague, abstract emotion in you. And I really do think that Shinkai and his work embodies that a lot. And then another thing that stands out to me from this movie is just how animators and Shinkai in particular is able to bring beauty into, or bring the mundane into such a romanticized and beautiful life. And I know romanticization in modern society is often considered like a pretty bad thing, but I think that the beauty of animation, because you see all of these like posts, well, I do at least, posts online that mirror or show how animation mirrors real life. It's just a very, it's a side by side comparison, and you just see that it's like an exact copy paste. Like it's very, very photorealistic. Why does that resonate with so many people? But I think that Shinkai touches on this beauty of everyday life that we often don't extract from it as you live out everyday life, just because you're so used to it. So he really, it's that like that transformation of the waiting and the mundane into something that's very beautiful. And I think that helps a lot of people just like self-reflect and appreciate life that much more. So that is my
that is your I love you, Miss Makoto Shinkai.
That is my praise that I'm just like spilling out of me for Shinkai.
I like that you brought up that idea of there's just something about seeing everyday life very I don't want to say hyper realistic, but I guess a little bit just like animated with so much detail. When you're watching animated movies, there's a certain magic to seeing very normal things animated so beautifully in a movie, because I think when it's animated, there's just this like there's this whimsy to it. There's this certain sheen that you don't really get to see when you're living through it, I guess. Yeah, Makoto Shinkai is wow. I could really talk about this man for like we could do a whole pod just about Makoto Shinkai. I think I really like that you brought up his other work, because one of the things that I always talk about with my brother, because my brother is a little bit more familiar with Shinkai. And there's something that my brother told me once that I think it was after we watched Weathering with You, where he was like, it feels like if you've watched Shinkai's work up until Kimi no Nawa, it almost feels like watching a writer workshop the same short story over and over until he's finally got it to a place where it's almost perfect. And I know that Shinkai has specifically said about this film that he doesn't think it's perfect.
The guy hates
He's like,
it.
yeah, it's like nowhere near where it should have been.
Don't watch it.
But you know what? I don't know the version that was in his head. I only know the version that he gave us. And the version that he gave us really changed something in me. And I think so that's one thing that I find really interesting about Shinkai, is because it's almost like he's tweaking the same vibe until finally he created Kimi no Nawa, and it's this like near masterpiece. And another thing that I love about Shinkai, I think he's one of those writers where I feel like I enjoy and appreciate his work so much on this like very profound level. And I think this might very much be because as a writer personally, I have also tried to explore very similar types of stories.
Right.
And when this movie came out, especially 2016-ish, 2017, I was starting university, and I was really trying to find my own place as a writer and my own style. And these types of stories, this same vibe, was something that I was also trying to explore over and over again in my writing, but I was never happy with it. And I remember when I watched Kimi no Nawa, I was like, this is a writer who has like perfected the vibe.
The
capital
vibe.
T, capital V, the vibe. And so I think there's just something about it that like, I guess I'm just very partial to this kind of nuanced like vibe, treading the line kind of storytelling with like romances that are just barely there, and stories that really focus on what our purpose is in the world, with themes of coming of age. And I also really like that he is writing these very melancholic stories that always lean more sincere than cynical, because I think that in recent years, like cynicism very much prevails our media. I think that I really like stories that aren't afraid to show that being sincere, being vulnerable is kind of beautiful and kind of the way that we should be living our lives. Maybe I'm just a romantic. I don't know.
I think we all are. We all
Yeah.
are a little bit romantic, no matter how much we try to not come across that way.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Yeah.
Something that we actually sometimes talk about, Chris and I, is just how hard writing is. Like, we literally
Oh my
always
God. Yeah.
say,
Writing is so difficult. Guys, it's so
like,
difficult.
it's a running joke. It's not even a joke. It's a running joke where we're like, oh yeah, I just wrote something the other day and I kind of want to show you, but also now that I'm reading it again, I hate it.
It's absolute trash. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and one of the greatest lessons that I think that I've learned as a quote unquote writer is that you cannot be afraid to write something, write an entire draft, delete all of it because it's bad, and then do it again. Like, I think that I personally really I have a contempt for wasting time, and I hate doing something just to find that my labor there's no fruit to my labor. But so learning this lesson of it's okay to draft something and completely rework it afterwards has really been a hard lesson to learn, but I think it's important just for anything in life as well. But going back to just what you were talking about the sincerity of it, and I think I really like how this movie has just great thematic cohesiveness, because I think that sometimes works can try to incorporate too much into what they're trying to say and do with what they have. But I think that Kimi no Nawa, they're very realistic in how they depict everyday life, which I was talking about earlier, like the beauty of everyday life, but at the same time, working magic into it. And I really like how you use that word. Like, it does come across as very magical.
Yeah.
I like how he explores themes of dreams and memory. I'm a really big softie for nostalgia because I think
that's the vibe.
that's the vibe. And then also just like the human tendency towards the spiritual realm, like talking about time as like, and how it weaves through different people's lives, and how we can overcome something that seems so impossible to overcome, which is time. Or it's always very optimistic and hopeful in that regard. How they explore themes of twilight and how it's like the divide between the real world and then the magical world, or like the spiritual. And it's by no means a small production, but it somehow still gives off vibes of being very personable and very close to the heart. And I think that's why, even though it like basically struck gold at the box office, and like how so many people know about this title and so many people love it, but I still feel like as somebody who has Your Name as like their favorite movie, I still feel like it can be something that is very close to me and very personal still, even though it's shared so lovingly by such a wide audience.
Yeah, and I also think I don't agree with the sentiment that a lot of people have towards popular works, where it's like, because something is popular, they don't like it, or it makes them like something less. And I have literally never felt that way.
I've done that
about anything in my life. I just don't agree with it. I think that like something is popular for a reason, because there's something about it that's culturally relevant, that where the themes are universal. I think that there are definitely valid reasons why some people might not connect with this movie on the same level, and like that's totally fine. I don't know. There are a lot of things in my life I like. Even though they're popular, I found them because they're popular, and I have no shame in that.
This girl loves Naruto.
My favorite anime ever is Naruto. Yes, roast me. Send me a tweet and roast me. I literally don't care. I think that, sometimes the best way I can describe this film, sometimes it's like a 1 hour and 40-minute exploration of this idea of like dreams and reality and how they go hand in hand. And I think it really encapsulates that feeling, like that feeling between consciousness and sleep, where you're like trying to cling to a dream that you just had, but you're like forgetting it as you wake up. Like, I feel like that's literally the vibe of the whole film. And I think that the way that it weaves in and out of its genres is executed so well, because you start
Yeah.
off and it's a teen romance, but then it's just also kind of a slice of life, but then there's this undercurrent of like supernatural and surrealist elements. I think it's technically classified as a fantasy, but I would say it's a little bit more surrealist because it's
I
just
agree.
barely fantastical. And I think it really takes advantage of animation as a medium to do that. And in terms of beauty, I like that you brought up that the movie is very beautiful, and that it strives to just show appreciation for um, the beauty of nature, but also the beauty of, like, I think there are these beautiful sweeping shots of Tokyo as well.
Yeah.
So it's also like, nature is beautiful and the rural countryside is beautiful, but also um, there's a certain grandeur and appreciation for city life as well. And so there's like a nice contrast there. And I think that there's this exploration of the beauty of nature, but also contrasted with the destructiveness of it. And the core aspect of the film is about natural disasters, which is such an integral part of Japanese culture. And I
That's
think
true.
Makoto Shinkai said that he was very much inspired to create this story because of I don't know if it was one of the earthquakes in Japan, but a significant natural disaster that happened in Japan. And it really shows how beautiful nature can be, even when it leaves catastrophe in its wake. And I think that there's this mix of being awestruck and enraptured, but in the next moment, absolutely devastated and destroyed. And I think that that's almost a perfect, like, parallel depiction of what being in love feels like when you're a teenager. And I think just the way that the supernatural elements of the story tie in so seamlessly with the human moments in the story is just amazing. And sometimes I just think about it and I cry a little bit because I love it so
This
much.
is just gonna be an hour of Chris and I being teens again.
Yeah, I'm soft for like stories about teenagers. I don't know why, because like it's not like we've been out of our teen years for that long.
Yeah.
It's probably been like what,
We
3
always
years?
refer to ourselves as adults in our podcasts, but today we're just gonna be
Okay,
teens.
in my defense, I am so confused by people who were born even 2 years younger than me. Like, I
Because
already
they were
can't
born in
follow the
2000?
lingo.
Oh,
I don't know, there's just a lot of okay, so for one thing, this is so off topic.
that's
For
okay.
one thing, I don't use TikTok, and I don't mean that in a way that like, oh my god, if
I
you use
don't use
TikTok, like that's
TikTok.
so
Yeah.
immature. I just mean that I never downloaded it because I have no self-control and I don't need another social media app
Yeah.
to distract me, so I never downloaded it. But now there's this whole culture on TikTok that I just don't
Yeah,
understand.
FOMO.
Um Anyways, that was so off topic. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so we split up the entire movie into 4 acts just to organize things a little bit better. So the first act is going to be all about what we think about the exposition as well as the introduction of each character. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and I just want to say again that this is my favorite part of the movie. So sometimes I'll just like leave it on while I'm like doing something else. The reason why this beginning is my favorite part to actually just leave on in the background is because it portrays the sounds and the images of the monotony of everyday life really in a very like calming manner. And I think that it portrays a nice feeling of like isolation, but not in a bad way. More like in a way where it's like, here's the things that you kind of just have to do and have to get through while you're waiting for something in your life to change. So you see shots of, the whole movie begins with shots of some of their rooms. You can really tell a lot about each of their characters from the items that you see in their rooms. So I don't know. I think those things give the movie a lot of like heart, a lot of character and personality, and gives each of the characters a lot of personality as well. So that's like my first impression of like the opening scenes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what makes the movie so atmospheric is having all those character details. Because I think that there is so much that you can learn about a character passively. And I think that yeah, just like all the little details are like it's it's really efficient character exposition, I think.
Hmm.
um what I really like about the opening, I think, is it's there's this key idea that's explored like right at the start of the movie and at the end, where Taki and Mitsuha are giving their little narrations about how they always feel like they're chasing something in their life and they don't quite know what it is, but there's this yearning and this longing for something, or for someone. To me, having that right at the beginning feels like it's almost a thesis statement for the film, in the sense that um, I think that there's this something very universal about that
Hmm.
internal quest for emotional fulfillment in our lives. And
Hmm.
we don't quite know what it is, but I think everyone sort of feels like they're constantly grasping for something that's just out of reach, or at least that was what was my takeaway from the film. And I feel like, the movie really opens with that idea right at the beginning, and it kind of ends with that
Yeah.
idea too. And I think like there's just something about that that is very particularly resonant for me as well.
Hmm.
Um I think when I watch this movie, it just makes me feel very validated. Like it makes me
Is
feel
this movie about
very,
me?
is this movie
Okay.
about me? Yeah, it makes me feel very understood on that
Yeah.
very like deeply emotional level.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think like starting the film with that vibe is like it kind of sets the tone for the whole film.
I do think that Shinkai in particular resonates with a lot of young viewers. The concerns and struggles and worries that
Mhm.
his character face are the exact same ones that a lot of modern young people have in real
Yeah.
life.
Mhm.
And what you said about always like on a quest to find fulfillment, I think
Yeah.
that at this stage in our lives, if we were to have like a
Mhm.
real talk here,
Yeah.
we are looking for a lot of things. I can't say what like folks in their middle ages are
Mm.
pursuing, but I can say that
Mhm.
I think young people and young adults at our age are looking for love. They're looking for a job. They're looking
Mm.
to for a certainty about their future. I think that
Yeah.
that like idea of looking and searching and waiting is
Mhm.
very, it's like very real for
Yeah, and I
us.
think that those kinds of things, like that's not to say that people who are 30 or 35 and up aren't also searching
Yeah,
for those things,
exactly.
but there's a certain it's a little bit different, I think, when you're a teenager and when you're in your 20s, because you're experiencing all those things for the first time, right? Like
Mhm.
you're looking for love probably for the first time, you're
Mhm.
finding your first real job, you're moving into your first real house or something like
Yeah.
that, right? And I think that being in your 20s especially is this like weird time in your life where you you're in between like adulthood, but you don't feel like you're really an adult yet.
Exactly.
And I think that Shinkai is just, especially in this film, is really good at distilling those feelings into like a certain into any given scene, and not making it feel too heavy handed.
Yeah, and that's why he has a lot of imagery. It's very like fitting that he has a lot of imagery of
Hmm.
like a train station, because
Yeah.
I do think that like the idea of waiting for the train and not
Hmm.
having anything to do but fill your thoughts with whatever
Yeah.
is like
Yeah.
relevant in your life right now. And then also because there's all of this uncertainty that comes with being young, in a modern society, there's a certain um, like comfort and like reconciliation of there being this idea of a red string of fate that is so prevalent throughout the story. And it's just like, yeah, like there's just a comfort in knowing that, oh, maybe there is like a job destined for me, there is somebody who is destined for me, I'll get there someday, you know.
There's this scene that happens towards the start of the film. I think it's like we kind of meet Mitsuha for the first time, and she, we see her going about her daily life, and then right at the end, um she's like she's just finished doing her like shrine maiden thing with her
Mm-hmm.
sister, and she's walking down the steps of the shrine, and she's with her little sister, and she's sort of looking out across her little town of Itomori, and she kind of she screams into the darkness, "Please make me a handsome Tokyo boy in my next life."
Mood.
And I was like, first of all, mood. Second of all, when Mitsuha screams that, she screams it under the arches of the shrine. There's something that like I really liked about this moment because it highlights her sort of naivety and her a little bit of her just like wacky personality, and especially like the way that her little sister is like, okay, like she's crazy. But then there's also like that longing that she has for a more interesting life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of the imagery of that scene feels very purposeful and ethereal.
Mm-hmm.
And then the scene kind of pans up into the sky. And it's like, it's almost this idea. I think that there's this very central idea in the movie of like the like nature and the universe kind of like being its own character in the story. Yeah, it just feels very ethereal in the way that the atmosphere is built, and in the way that the universe kind of always feels like it's listening to the woes of the characters. You know what I mean?
Just like I sorry. The sky.
The sky. She's beautiful.
Which guy?
We love her.
The sky. This guy is
oh my god.
There are a lot of scenes and moments that do revolve around the sky. And you know, the comet, and how they're always the like twilight and the sunset, how they're always looking upwards. And that is just the vibe of the movie. Like, as you said, God. there is such a hope and naivete and like optimism that comes from looking upwards at something, or looking forwards to something, for looking to the future and looking up and seeking like almost like divine intervention, or seeking something that's just greater than yourself, that sense of unity and connection, despite geographical, or even in this case temporal distance. So it's just very hopeful and encouraging. And just about like that scene, or any scene really related to Itomori in particular, I really like something about living in a small town. It seems very attractive to me from this movie, because even though we consistently see Mitsuha complaining and groaning about the place that she lives and how it's very boring, you get these like iconic scenes of the beauty that surrounds her, and you think to yourself like, how can you get bored of this? Like, how can you get tired of this?
I used to think the same thing. Like, again, we like, you know, we're from the suburbs. The suburbs is just a weird place because it's like, it's not a small town. It's just like
there.
It's just like there. But it's also not the city. So it's just like, what are you even good for?
Still boring.
But I will say that, like, honestly, I went to school in a very small town. I went to school in Stratford, Ontario, home of Justin Bieber.
Nice.
And I think that like while I was there, I like really hated being there. But then I also would have these moments of like, it's just so beautiful. And I think it's like, it's really interesting the way that we sort of romanticize these like narratives in our head.
It's that whole thing where it's like, you want what you can't have.
Before we move to Act 2, I also wanted to make a note that I think the VAs do a great job of voicing their characters, but also voicing their characters when they're playing their other characters, if that makes sense.
What?
Like,
oh
so,
my gosh,
sorry,
I know
let me say that again.
what you mean. I get it.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so I think they do a great job of voicing each other.
Yes.
So like, for example, when Taki is technically Mitsuha, or when Mitsuha is technically Taki, or like when Taki is in Mitsuha's body, we still hear Mitsuha's voice, but it's Taki in her body, right? And so I think it's like, there's just really great like moments of like Taki's like VA like taking on more like feminine mannerisms in his like speech and tone and voice. And I think that really goes a long way in like letting us know like who's who is who right now, and just kind of like, I think there's a lot of personality that comes out of their characters even when they're not in their respective bodies, if that makes
It's
sense.
so cute too. Like,
Yeah, it's really cute. And the other thing I want to say about the intro is that even though the movie is only an hour and 40 minutes, like that's not a lot of time, but the romance, which is very central to the story, it doesn't happen right away. Like it's not insta love. And I like that because, first of all, I just really don't like insta love.
oh my
Because
gosh,
I,
are we going
call
to?
me a cynic,
Yeah.
but I don't really believe in this love at first sight thing. I think you can be attracted to someone like physically, but like I think like the whole like falling in love thing, like I don't think that happens right away. And I really like that the movie sort of like has these montages that indicate like passing of time and sort of streamlining the plot to show us that they have been body switching for a while, and that they're falling into each other's routines.
Are
And I
you
like
trying
that.
to say that when I
Mhm.
see a character that I like on screen, that I'm not falling in love with him?
Yeah. I don't know how to tell you this, Emily,
We're not
but
in dumpster fire
fictional
yet.
characters aren't real. I don't know how to tell you that. Oh my gosh. And then the other thing, like Mitsuha getting girls to have a crush on Taki and then like vice versa is just so funny to me. Like the way that she just like really knows how to flirt with Okudera senpai is just like, there's a version of this film where Mitsuha falls in love with Okudera senpai, and I would watch that movie.
This leads us into Act 2, which is the bulk of the action and the body swapping and everything that happens, which, as you said, is so cute. Like, it's so cute.
Oh my god. Are you okay?
The way that she like spends his money, and he's all like,
oh my
why
god,
are you
yeah.
spending my money? And she's like, well, I worked for it.
Yeah. So the scene where Taki, as Mitsuha, visits the shrine with Mitsuha's little sister and her grandma. And I guess the scene is a bit more, I don't know, lore heavy, I guess. Like we're kind of going into the more supernatural elements of the movie. And first of all, it's good that we're visiting the shrine at this point in the movie because this is sort of the setting for the climax. So it's kind of important to see it. And then I think that this scene very distinctly showcases this appreciation for the natural world and the very vague line of like spirituality and the strangeness of the universe and all its mysteries. And I just think it's portrayed in this scene so well, because otherwise, like, if we were to return to this shrine and we never really took the time to dive into the spirituality of this location, then the climax would just feel very random and the payoff wouldn't be good. So setting the tone here is very great, and I think that sort of ethereal, mysterious tone just works really, really well for this scene. And sorry, sorry, I just have to talk about this really quick. The transition between this scene and the next scene is, I really like it because basically Taki kind of has this like, Taki as Mitsuha kind of has this moment at the shrine, and then there's this transition where they go back into their respective bodies, and Taki wakes up back in his body, back in his room, and he's crying. And I think that this hang on, I have to collect myself for a second.
This whole pod
is the dumpster fire. I'm so sorry. So Taki wakes up crying, and I think that that transition is it almost is jarring, and it leaves the viewer very surprised. And he wakes up and he realizes that Mitsuha, when she was in his body, had actually set up a date for him with Okudera senpai, who is his coworker that he has a crush on. And in this scene, he wakes up, he realizes he has to rush to this date, and then we cut to Mitsuha back in her own body, and she also wakes up crying. And the music that is specifically playing in this scene is Mitsuha's theme.
My gosh.
Off of the OST. The song is called Mitsuha's theme, or Theme of Mitsuha, or something like that. And it's this really hopeful, bittersweet, like melancholic piano track. So the fact that Mitsuha's theme is playing during this scene where Taki is rushing to his date with Okudera senpai, there's a lot of layers there because Mitsuha's crying and she's like, I don't know why I'm crying. And she says this line of like, oh, I think I'm sad because I wanted to go on the date with Okudera senpai. But then the fact that her song is playing during the date between Taki and Okudera almost has this like feeling of like Mitsuha is kind of there on the date with them in spirit type thing. I think the sadness of that song contrasted with Taki going on this date is, yeah, it's just like that barely there touch of romance. Like we're finally taking a step towards the romantic themes in this movie. Sorry, that was like my little rant about why I love that sequence.
I love this part because just like sometimes I feel like you wake up and there's this feeling of like, just as you said, like melancholy, and sometimes it's very inexplicable, so you come up with like reasons for yourself, like why you're feeling a particular way, like, and then when you watch that scene, you ask yourself, is she crying because she's sad? Is she crying because she's happy? And then even herself, like she tells herself this thing, this not lie, but she tells herself this justification, and you as an audience know that that is not the reason why. Or I'm just gonna use another scene as an example. She the next day after this scene, she cuts her hair off. It reminds me of this one scene in Howl's Moving Castle, where which is also one of my favorite movies of all time. And there's this scene where the Wicked Witch of the West, of the Waste, tells Sophie, "You're in love, aren't you? I can tell because you're like, you've been sighing all day." And that's kind of like the feeling that you get from Mitsuha after Taki and Okudera goes on this date and she cuts off all her hair. And when Tessie sees it, he's like, oh, did she like go through a breakup?
I think it's so realistic sometimes that like like you said, like we try to find excuses for like, you know, why we're feeling glum. And like sometimes we do wake up and we don't really know why something is affecting us in a certain way.
It's just like an encouragement to be, I think, more honest with yourself. So the body switching stops and Taki kind of realizes that, okay, I'm going to go find her, like physically.
I also think that it's just great mystery writing that I think up until the body switching stops, Mitsuha is like the only one really talking about the comet, because at this point the audience still thinks that they're in the same timeline, right?
Right.
So after the body switching stops, Taki starts, like you said, he starts wondering. He starts sort of sketching the mountains and the pictures that he saw of Itomori in the museum. And this is a great montage. Also with the use of the music in this moment. There's a bit of a tonal shift here in the film because it's a little bit more solemn and you start kind of feeling like there's something that's not quite right. And as an audience, we don't quite know what that is because now we're only with Taki at this point. And again, I just think it's great mystery writing, the way that we're able to kind of shift the tone from this like lighthearted date into like, wait, there's something wrong here. And I also wrote a note in my notes. I was like, how can these kids afford to take the Shinkansen across the country? Like, do you know how expensive
they're in high
those
school.
bullet trains are? Yeah, the bullet trains are expensive. So I was like, I wish. Anyways, yeah, it's a great.
Let's do that.
It's a great sequence.
Chris, you and I bet. Let's go up to a like Barrie or something.
We don't have bullet trains in Canada. We only have the GO
We'll
train,
take
and that
the polar
is
bear.
not the same thing. We'll take a polar bear. Yeah, we have polar bears if you guys didn't know.
In case you don't live in Canada, that's the only way we get around.
Yeah, we don't really use cars that much. We just kind of have polar
They're
bears.
fast.
They're pretty fast. Yeah.
Like
if you've ever
bullet fast.
Yep.
A little bit faster than the moose.
Yeah, like moose are a little bit slow because they're clunky and they like are more
and
heavy.
And the ride isn't
antlers.
as smooth, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Anyways,
let's move
Okay,
on.
I do agree that like this point, this is like midway through the movie. This is where the
Hmm.
stakes get hella high.
Yeah.
It's a big shift, but it's done subtly and it's done with a lot of care.
And I also think that because of all of the little um, lore and stuff that's sprinkled out, like very subtly throughout the first part of the movie, it
Hmm.
just really sets up the foundation for this mystery so that
Yeah.
it's a good plot twist because you can you can understand it and it makes sense,
Hmm.
but it's also something that like you know you weren't expecting. So
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
So before we move on to Act 3, I just want to bring our attention to another
Yes, ma'am.
extraordinary cinematic sequence in this movie.
Oh
And
boy.
basically, it's when Taki kind of like leaves his friends behind and he gets the
Hmm.
idea to.
First of all,
Yeah.
the fact that he just ditches his friends that went out of their way for him. And he's
Honestly.
just like, I'm a bounce, hashtag I'm the pro tag.
But he ditches his friends and he
Yeah.
decides to visit the shrine that he visited while in Mitsuha's body. And he
Hmm.
gets there and enters the underworld. And
Yeah.
he's in the cave. He drinks her spit, and then
Love that.
that's like really romantic.
Oh my god, it's just
First
so
date,
romantic.
let's just spit and then drink each other's spit. That's what happens. He gets there and then he slips and he falls and he looks up and sees like this drawing of a
Love that.
comet, which instigates this and this beautiful montage. Like the main theme of the entire sequence is like how everything is just connected. So you see how the
Yes,
tail
yeah.
of the picture of the comet is elongated to show this string, and it's very much how they liken time to being a string, and how the comet
Hmm.
is a string across the sky, how there's the red string of fate. It's very breathtaking.
Yeah, this is a very beautiful sequence. There's also, I mean, obviously, if you've seen the movie, and I'm assuming you have, if you're listening to us talk about
Yeah.
it, there's an animation style shift in this
Hmm.
specific sequence, which is great. And like you said, it's just a great visualization of the core theme in the film of the centrality, I guess, and oneness of humanity
Hmm.
and nature transcending time and space. And I think that this is the most overt visualization that we get in the film of blurring the lines of time.
Yeah.
It's dramatized in this really just really beautifully animated scene with Taki literally diving into
Hmm.
Mitsuha's thoughts. Because I think time travel is such a difficult thing to do. Like, if you're committing to time travel in your story, you have to commit so hard. And so, just to be able to write time travel like subtly like this is honestly a feat within itself.
Or another thing that I think Shinkai does really well is just the like how he scales things. And what I mean by that
Mm,
is sometimes you can feel really really small, but sometimes you can
yeah.
feel really really big and very and very significant. And I think that he
Yeah.
does both in this film because just like bringing
Yes.
it all
Yeah.
the way back to what we were saying before about the
Mhm.
destruction of and beauty of nature. I think that
Yeah.
when someone comes before nature, especially like before natural disasters and stuff like that, yeah, like it is very humbling. And when you look up at the sky, you feel very humbled because you're reminded of just something greater out there. But then this
Yeah.
sequence is really a moment where you can just appreciate humanity. There's this like scene within the sequence where you see cells dividing, and basically the
Yeah.
cells are supposed to represent Mitsuha and how in accordance to the red string of fate kind of concept, how even from the moment that her cells began to divide, she was already destined for like greater things. These are like
Mhm.
important perspectives to adopt, throughout your life.
Like you said, there's this idea of fate that's very central to this sequence in particular, but also throughout the film of, yeah, being destined for something or for someone. And I really like that the film carries that theme throughout the movie of like destiny and fate and
Mm-hmm.
the universe having a greater purpose for you, and that the universe will be there for you to guide you wherever you need to be, even though you're just a small human in this vast, vast world. But at the same time, it's still on us and on our own actions to seek those adventures out. And I think like that's really evident in the film, because like it's really on us to not be afraid to put ourselves out there, to be vulnerable, to chase the things that we want in life.
So that transitions us into Act 3 now, which is when immediately afterwards the body switching starts again, and kind of all of the action that leads up to the climax of this movie, which takes place at the crater. I've talked a little bit about like dreams and nostalgia in another episode, but I really like, I kind of want to talk about it again in this one, because I think that Your Name just profits so much off of the idea of the nature of dreams. You can like, it's so vivid and clear to you when you first experience it, but then as soon as you wake up, you kind of forget all about it. And I personally kind of liken that to growing up in general. I have very distinct memories of when I was a kid, and I would say things to myself like, oh, adults are so boring. I'm never going to become like boring or hopeless like an adult. Like I literally told myself this as a kid. And then I have very distinct memories of me as a teenager being like, life right now as a teen is so great. Like I'm never going to forget what it's like to be a teenager. These are the moments that I live for. But now... like,
listen, I'm already forgetting what it feels like.
So it's kind of like crazy that you can feel so strongly about certain things and like think a certain way, and then the more years pass and the more you grow up, you can just kind of like forget about that completely. So I don't think that feeling is restricted to just dreams. I do think that feeling is applicable to like growing up and memories as well, right?
Well, I want to talk about the flashback scene that we get of Mitsuha going to Tokyo.
Oh, yeah.
The storytelling that's a little bit non-linear here. Taki learns that at some point during their body switching, Mitsuha had gone to Tokyo to try to find him. But because their timelines are off, Mitsuha, when she goes to Tokyo in her timeline to visit Taki, Taki doesn't know her yet because Taki hasn't met her yet. First of all, I like nonlinear storytelling, but it's very easy to do it poorly. This is a really great use of nonlinear storytelling, because I think every time you do it, you have to sort of justify to the audience, why are you showing me this now? Like it has to add impact to the story now. And I think that this scene of them encountering each other on the train is technically the first time that we're actually seeing them together on screen for the first time in the movie, except for the opening shot. And I think that it adds so much tension now, because as Mitsuha is getting all nervous looking for him, us as an audience, we have this like dreaded feeling in our stomach, because we know that Taki is not going to recognize her. And it's like, we know that she is about to get her, sweetie. And you just kind of, it really like gives you that gut punch, because Taki is realizing this now in retrospect, right? That, that girl that he had seen, he doesn't remember her, or like he didn't know her back then. And he feels a lot of regret in the moment now. And I think that it really hammers in the idea of not knowing how much something means to you until it's too late. And I think that happens very much in real life too, where sometimes, similar to what you were saying about nostalgia, we look back on something and we're like, man, I didn't really appreciate that in the moment. Okay, let's talk about that scene on the crater.
That scene.
So they both get to the crater on top of the hill. I think there's this moment of quiet at the most tense point in the film that is it's just really great use of sound, and I guess of cinematography too. And I really like the depiction of them being in the same place at the same time, but at different points in time. Like the surrealism is really jumping out here. And it's so like I'm it's so beautiful and satisfying. And I think that just the imagery of it hitting twilight and then they sort of see each other for this very short amount of time. Like they literally have seconds or minutes or whatever to see each other, and then it'll be over. I also really like the piano version of the opening song is playing in the background as they talk to each other. The opening song is usually very upbeat, but I think the idea of the piano version playing in this scene at the climax also feels very cathartic, I guess. And then the suddenness of this moment ending, kind of like they literally
With the
just
marker?
they're about to write each other's names and the marker just drops, and it's kind of like that that idea of like that unfinished thought is very representative of what I think love and navigating relationships feels like in real life, where there are so many things that like we just feel like we didn't say in the moment that we didn't get to say when we had the chance.
This is definitely the climax of the film. They really, like, Shinkai really tries to strip away everything else until it is just the bare bones of like the main message that he wants to get across. And it's like, hi, we're at the climax. Let's strip away any like unnecessary sound, any unnecessary music, and let's just be here, the two of us at twilight, which has been a recurring motif, and let's just talk. Like it's very much just, if you were to get nothing out of this, get this, that
this scene,
exactly, like that life is beautiful, that love is magic, that that hope and optimism can prevail even in the most impossible of circumstances. Even when you guys are in two different timelines, you will meet and find each other through all the chaos and through all of the struggles and hardships, that there will be like quiet moments. And that's why I think this climax works in a way that is very different from other more dramatic and more showy climax moments, you know?
Also, the main song of this film, Sparkle, it starts, I really like the use of it in the film, and I think that Sparkle as a choice for the climax is interesting because it's not a very like upbeat song, and I think it sort of marks again like a turning point in the film, and sort of creates that tone of feeling very bittersweet and hopeful, even though the action that we're seeing on the screen is literally Mitsuha running through the town, trying to shepherd her whole town out of the you know, to evacuate them, and like there's a lot of things happening, and it's technically like it's an action-packed scene, but the music creates this undercurrent of optimism and hopefulness.
This whole film in general is like very much, there's action in it, but you don't
there is,
it's not what you take away from the film,
Yeah.
But it's not like the whole thing is devoid of action. There's actually a lot going on, but
there's
like,
a lot going on. There's a comet, there's a whole town that dies, there's time travel. There's a lot of things.
There, like when you step back, you realize it's a lot of stuff, but that's not what you take from the movie when you leave it, which is like nice. Let's move on. Excuse me. Okay.
Oh, I wanted to, I don't know if you had anything to say about the scene where Mitsuha looks at her hand and realizes Taki has not written his name on her hand. I did have a note about it.
Okay, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
So to me, this scene is the equivalent of a grand romantic gesture. You know how every romance movie has that grand romantic gesture where it's just the guy shows up to wherever and you know it's him throwing rocks at the window or it's him starting a flash mob. You know how it goes. There's always some ridiculous
running
display
through the airport
of affection.
Don't leave.
Running through the airport, very, very common example. And it's usually always very grandiose. It's usually very like public. And in this film, I like that there is still, it feels like a grand romantic gesture, but it's not this ostentatious.
He's not even there.
He's not even there. No one is there. It's literally just Mitsuha. She looks at her hand and realizes that he has written "I love you" on her hand instead of his name. Like, I think you can look at the scene and be like, that's so dumb. You can be like, Taki, why don't you just write your damn name so she can find you on Facebook later? But I think what I loved about it was that I think that it shows that this movie, it really strives to be a romance film. Like, it's not straying away from its tone, and it's very in line with their characters and just them being teenagers and just having their feelings, I guess, overtake logic. Yeah, this scene gets me every single time. I know it's one of the most melodramatic scenes in the film, but it is probably one of my
Fun
favorites.
fact, Kris has a tattoo
Oh yeah.
of Mitsuha's hand
Yeah.
with the message written on it.
I do have a tattoo of this scene on my arm. I do. It is Mitsuha's hand. With
I think
Taki's
that if I were to
writing.
get a your name tattoo, it would be the
Yeah.
same one. So good choice.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh my god, that makes me feel so happy.
This is me validating you. I would get the same one.
I feel so validated right now.
Maybe
because when I was
maybe if I were to get one though, just to make it a little different, it'd be of Taki's hand, but with like the one line.
Just the line. Honestly, that's kind of artsy. I'm kind of into that. You should get that. We should get matching tattoos.
Okay. That brings us to Act 4, which is saving the town of Itomori, and then also the ending after, like, there's kind of a time skip and us catching up with the characters. So there's this scene of the comet hitting the Earth.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. This is probably my favorite scene, actually, because it's just complete silence, but there's so much going on visually on the screen, and it once again it reminds you of that everything can happen so fast that when it comes to like nature and when it comes to how we can be so helpless in front of like natural disasters and just the power of the natural world, that the sound doesn't even hit you, but everything is gone already. And once you hear the crash, it's like nobody's there anymore, you know? All of the buildings are wiped away in a second. And that is such a fitting thing to have come after the climax. Because in the climax, it's like this like moment of contemplation and this moment of quiet. And then it's followed up by this like huge rush to like save everybody in the town. It's this big panic and this big scurrying of everybody like just leaving and evacuating to the high school. And then I feel like as you go throughout the movie, there's this feeling of almost like fighting against nature and wanting that disaster to not come. And I think that in an ideal world, it's the feeling where it's like, oh, the happy ending comes when we are able to avert that situation and avert that terrible disaster. But you're reminded that you can't do that with nature. You can't just will a natural disaster to not happen. You kind of just have to survive it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's such a great scene, and I think that you can really tell how much Shinkai like really put into this film in terms of portraying natural disasters. What I love about the depictions of like the comet and the destruction and everything is that it's really beautiful, but it's also very like we are always at the mercy of nature.
So we arrive at a 5-year time skip, I believe. I think that it's very appropriate for Taki to be, I don't know if he was like an architect or something.
I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
Architecture or engineering or something.
Yeah. I think it's very appropriate that he says this line, and it's all about how he wants to make landscapes that can last in people's memories and warm people's hearts. And then I was watching the ending, and I realized that this is kind of the essence of what Shinkai was trying to do and also achieved with this movie. Because I do think that there is a certain quote-unquote landscape to a movie, or really like any sort of media or writing or literature or anything like that, or creation, in that, you know, there's stuff happening in the foreground, in the midground, and in the background to any story as well, right? And
Yeah.
the whole idea is like, especially from an architect's point of view, is that you're trying to make these landscapes that will last in people's memories. And that's kind of exactly what Shinkai did with this movie. Like, as I said before, he took this movie that was so filled with action and drama and romance. This movie was just this creation of a landscape that evokes particular feelings in viewers. And that's, I think, what makes it a masterpiece, in my eyes at least.
Yeah, that's sort of the quest of all writers, you know, is to create things that people will remember and things that at least one person can connect with. I really, really love that there is a time skip, first of all, and that we get to see Taki in this like post-uni job grind, #relatable. I think it's very fitting for this story to move forward or to flash forward to adulthood, because I think that it offers this contrast, and it kind of represents this feeling that adults tend to be less naive and further away from their dreams. They tend to be less like, you know, as you grow up, there's this prevailing notion that adults will move away from these fantastical thoughts and move away from imagination. As adults, we should be able to channel our emotions, to channel our imagination, and to not be distracted by the mundane like grind of life, to, you know, find excuses to our feelings.
And also, like, I just love happy endings. Like, I'm so glad we ended with them reuniting, and thank you.
I'm really glad that Shinkai decided to give closure to this story. To leave it open-ended would have kind of betrayed the tone of the story. And I know that he is the kind of person who would totally leave his stories open-ended. But I think that giving it closure, but not like overt closure, is it's still very true to his style, but it leaves the film on this tone of hopefulness. And I think that I feel like there's definitely symbolism here with this end scene taking place like during spring with like new beginnings. And I really like that they find each other again as adults, because I think that says something about how even when we feel like it's too late in our lives to be experiencing things, it's always possible if we believe and if we want to and if we don't give up hope. Also, the very, very, very end scene where they are both on the trains and then they see each other. And then they get off the trains and they're frantically trying to look for each other again. And then they reach the staircase
and they're like,
and they dead ass try to pass each other again. And at this point, we've seen that they've already passed each other. And
for what?
You did this for what? Taki Mitsuha, you jumped off that train, and for what? And I think, and I think it's such an interesting detail to me that they would go through all of that only to pass each other again. And I think that just shows like, man, people are so afraid to be vulnerable. People are so afraid to take chances. It takes the time to like slow down and linger in that moment of like, if we don't take chances, we'll always be searching for that feeling. We'll always be aimlessly hoping. We'll always be chasing the vibe with no goal. And eventually you just gotta like suck it up and say hi to the girl, you know? So yeah, it's just a beautiful ending.
And this is not us being like, people need to be more vulnerable. Like, I would say that I would do the same thing.
This is at me.
This is self-talk.
I'm literally subtweeting myself. Did we do it? Did we just talk about the writing in Kimi no Nawa? Did we do that? Okay, so our next segment is called the Bechdel test, and this is a test that we do every episode. It was devised by a cartoonist named Alison Bechdel, and she basically wrote out these 3 questions to use as a measure of female representation in any given piece of media. So the 3 questions are there at least two named female characters? Do they speak to each other? And do they speak to each other about something other than a male love interest? So.
Okay. So there's definitely two named ones. Do they speak to each other? When she's like in Taki's body, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that counts.
Does that count to you?
That counts.
To me, it counts.
That counts. And do they speak about something other than a male love interest? Well, they like talk enough to have asked each other out on a date. So
yeah. So
I do think it passes.
I do think it passes. Yeah.
Like, I didn't even really think about whether this film would pass the Bechdel test because its female characters are so well fleshed out and realistic.
Yeah. So just to talk about Okudera Senpai first.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Emily and I found out that Okudera Senpai in the first timeline before the time skip is 24, 23?
Yeah.
And Taki and Mitsuha are 17, y'all. That was a shock because I assumed that Okudera Senpai was like 19, maybe 20. And the fact that she's 24 made me go, huh? It's just
she went out on a date with a 17-year-old high schooler.
She goes out on a date with a 17-year-old. The reason that I'm going to decide right now that it's not going to bother me as much is because I think there is an implication that Okudera Senpai wasn't very like, it's not like she was actually serious about anything. Like she really did treat Taki like a little brother. So that's fine. I really like Okudera Senpai. I think that her presence in the film feels very strong and fleshed out, especially because having an older, wiser character to kind of offer wisdom to the characters and to the audience, it feels very purposeful.
I agree.
Like she feels very much like a big sister.
One of the scenes that sticks out the most to me for Okudera is when they are at like the hostel and then she's like downstairs with Tsukasa and the two of them are like just conversing and she's like smoking, which comes across as surprising actually because she's very much set up to be this character who is girly and like also the object of everyone's affections, and so you see that she has this like habit that's often seen as a negative habit that people run towards. And she even says like,
I'm trying to quit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in that moment you kind of see, oh, like this isn't just a one-dimensional or two-dimensional character. I think that you can get caught up a lot with as we said before, like the naivete of the film and the coming of age aspect. And then you have this character who is being very real with herself and she's a little bit older. She brings this kind of like maturity to the screen that the other characters around her just don't really have yet. And she's like cute and
oh my gosh,
like
she's so
she
pretty.
dresses nice and
she's really pretty.
So the other character, main female character, is Best Girl Mitsuha.
Miss Mitsuha.
So I love Mitsuha. She's very much like the girl next door, I think, for a lot of people. Yeah. But also she's vague enough, actually, that I think most female viewers can relate to her. There's enough room for interpretation with her where it's like anybody, not anybody, but like a lot of people can put themselves in her shoes and thus feel like they're closer to her or feel like they're going on this adventure with her. I don't think that she is a very unique character, but I think that's okay and that kind of makes me like her even more.
I agree. Like I think that, you know, especially if you've like listened to our previous episodes, we talk a lot about like complex character writing and like we need layers and you know they have to be like dynamic and like morally gray or whatever. Morally gray. But I do think that there is a lot of value, especially for a film like this, in just having a character where there's enough there that she feels like a real person, but also, like you said, there's room for people to really see themselves in her. So yeah, she is best girl.
Yeah, like not everybody can relate to being a waterbender. That is
shut up.
I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
Yes.
Yeah. shall we proceed? Are you guys ready? Okay. Are folks ready for this dumpster fire? Like, guys, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but we lit the fire at the start of this episode. Oh, wait, we should explain what dumpster fire is.
Oh, yeah. So, dumpster fire is a segment at the end of every episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where we can just talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Yep. I'm going to start dumpster fire with literally the most irrelevant point ever. However, it is relevant to me.
Yeah.
And I am part of this podcast, so I'm going to bring it up.
Okay. Okay, I'm like scared. Like, why did
No,
she
don't be
set
scared. Don't be
herself
scared.
up like
It literally has nothing to do with you. This is not going to affect you in any way, but it affects me.
Okay.
So therefore, it affects you.
Okay.
So Taki's dad, who has, I think, one line.
Yeah. Oh, why didn't you make breakfast? That's the line.
Literally
in
has
case
one
anyone was
line.
wondering, I can quote the movie.
Yeah, she's watched it 8 times.
Yeah.
The way that Taki's dad has literally a single line, and I had to pause the movie and go, "Oh my god," because that voice is Kakashi Sensei from Naruto. I didn't make that up. Yeah, for the Japanese. Taki's dad's VA is Kakashi Sensei from Naruto.
You know what?
He's an
icon.
icon.
We were talking about how like there are characters that are really relatable. I personally can't relate to having Kakashi be my dad, but
and that's why Taki is not best boy, because his dad is Kakashi Sensei, and I just
that's
can't.
Just not relatable.
I recognized that right away. Like, it was honestly comically fast. Like, I'm a little ashamed.
You know, Taki's 2 friends. The other friend is voiced by is Tobio Kageyama. Did you know that? Wait, hello, Kristen? Hello?
Shut up.
Did you know that?
Can we not?
So I personally can't relate to being best friends with Kageyama and also the son of Kakashi. Personally, I don't know about you.
Personally, that is just so unrelatable. The way that you just dropped that bomb on me, like,
he's my favorite. I think he's my new favorite voice actor. Our favorite voice actor used to be Bakugo's VA.
Yes,
but now it's Kaito Ishiwaka. You're doing great, Kaito. Thank you for all of your
doing
service.
great, sweetie.
He's doing great.
Boy.
Yeah. When we started the podcast, I was very open to doing like other shows and series. But in the back of my mind,
oh my god,
I always knew that I wanted to start this podcast just so we could talk about your name. So now that we've done it,
honestly, this might be our last episode, guys. Yeah, it's been a good run. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you for making it
for this long journey of 3 months that we have been running this pod.
Yeah.
Let's talk about RADWIMPS.
Yeah.
They have written the OST for this film.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, RADWIMPS X Shinkai is a
my
match
favorite
made
ship.
in heaven. It's my favorite ship. It's the greatest thing that media has ever given us. I think honestly that RADWIMPS and their sound, I feel like their sound is so integral to this movie and to Shinkai's stories. The way that they're able to capture the emotion of Shinkai's stories and themes and distill it into a sound is so beautiful and so powerful. And I don't know, I almost feel like my love for this film is so tightly entwined with my love for the soundtrack. Like it's almost like you can't have one without the other.
Their sound is very emotional, and I think that when you think emotional, you think of stuff like Mitsuha's theme, like soft piano and like very like melancholy melodies and stuff. But RADWIMPS very much is distinctly rock, I would say, like soft rock. Yeah. And I think it's very counterintuitive that soft rock could portray such a dynamic range of emotions and so strongly at that too. And I think that the best way, for me at least, to describe RADWIMPS music is nostalgic. That almost give off this like quote unquote twinkling sensation.
Yes.
That encapsulates like a lot of the nostalgic moments or the feelings that are portrayed in a lot of Shinkai works. Is just exactly the type of feeling and emotion that the film wants to portray as well. So it's very much like the film and the music have the same goal in mind. They're so intertwined in that way that it just works perfectly together, and they in fact amplify each other's purpose and goal.
It definitely has that feeling of reflection and yearning. But yearning and longing for something happy, like happy memories.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up in Dumpster Fire. Okay, sometimes people liken Your Name with a silent voice. Now, I won't go into like spoilers for a silent voice or anything just yet. I'm sure we'll do that episode eventually, unless we retire right after this episode, which is completely plausible. So I'm gonna just put this out there and say that I definitely think Your Name is better because of the like fantastical aspect. I just think that Silent Voice does a lot of things well, but they it's very much like one story that hinges a lot on the emotional like depth of sometimes like mental illness and like grief and physical impairment. But I've heard people kind of like look down on Your Name because of the quote-unquote realism that is lacking between Taki and Mitsuha's relationship, because I think that it can be argued, like all they did was switch bodies and like they never you know, have a sit-down conversation. But I think that's beside the point actually of the movie.
I agree.
And I do think that the two of them share this innate connection that is supposed to be hinged on magic and on this like impossible connections. So it's supposed to throw realism out the window entirely. And on top of that, I think that the relationship is supposed to focus on that childlike naivete of romance, which like we've been bringing up that word like naivety the whole episode. I like that they overplay it, and I like how that they treat it as something that is precious and not up for a more realistic interpretation.
To me, Your Name is the story that I connected to the most. It's the story that I, there's just something about it that is particularly resonant for me. But it doesn't mean that A Silent Voice is like a bad movie. Like it's a very good movie. It's a great movie.
It's great.
And I love it a lot, actually. So I would almost say like you can't objectively say that one is better than the other, because I think that they are fundamentally different stories. The themes that are at the core of both of those movies are just so different that, like you said, I don't think that you can even compare the two against each other. I do see why some people would not connect with Your Name. I do think that like it's because it's more rooted in magical realism and sort of these fantastical elements. There is this suspension of disbelief that needs to happen in order to enjoy Kimi no Nawa.
I just thought of this now. You know, another comparison that people often make is between Shinkai and Ghibli films.
Interesting. Actually, no, I totally see that.
Just imagine like looking up to something your whole life, like Shinkai did with Ghibli films.
That's
and
true.
Surpassing it.
That's crazy.
I wouldn't know how to act.
Should we quickly talk about why do you think Kimi no Nawa was so commercially successful? Because we can talk about like why it was critically acclaimed. We just talked about that. But why do you think it was so commercially successful to the point where global audiences were noticing it? It became the most, best grossing anime film of all time.
I think it's the style of like the animation and the style of art, because I would argue that though Western modern animation looks very sleek and it looks great, like honestly it looks amazing, but it doesn't portray that realism of real everyday life. Instead it goes for a more cartoonish style, which is still like very high quality, but it's a different like approach to animation. And so I think that people were very maybe were very intrigued by that. And then they watched the whole thing and realized that, like, oh, like I got way more out of that than I expected. I got like the whole package, you know?
And I also think just like it could just also be the timing of certain movies, like in terms of what makes a blockbuster a blockbuster. It could also be like what's the current climate for coming of age stories or for media or for anime at any given time. So there's a lot of factors to that.
That's true.
I would say.
Like now that we're on the topic of like what do young people in today's climate resonate with, right? Like living in a rural town and wanting more, living in a city and not being happy where you are, just wanting more out of life.
Yeah.
So I guess that brings us to the end of Dumpster Fire.
Wow.
And now we will do our ratings.
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess I'll go first for our ratings.
Are you ready?
It's a stretch.
We love that.
Yeah. So obviously it's a 5 out of 5 for me. Markers. So here's why I choose markers.
Oh my god, that's so good.
So not only does the marker play a very essential role in the movie, especially when they're like writing stuff on each other's hands, but I like how the marker came up like earlier in the movie when they're like writing on each other's arm and writing
that's
on her
true.
cheek.
It did come up earlier.
And one of my favorite lines that I can remember is like when they're asking each other like, why don't you have a girlfriend? Why don't you have a boyfriend? And they're both like, I'm single because I want to be.
Oh, wow.
But you both know that like
relatable line.
They don't want to be.
Yeah.
Low key.
I'm gonna rate it 5 out of 5 Okudera Senpai's skirts.
Ripped or
ripped skirts, but with Mitsuha stitching. Do I even have to explain? Nah. I think one of my favorite scenes is definitely like when Okudera Senpai is just like taking all this flack from a very rude customer, and then Mitsuha Astaki stitches her skirt for her, and Okudera Senpai's like, oh my god, he knows how to stitch. And it's like,
that's
absolutely not. Like, you think a teenage boy knows how to, So, and I also just like how it just shows like how willing Mitsuha is to like help out another girl. And then 5 out of 5 because, guys, come on. There's nothing for me to say.
Yeah. Have we said a single bad thing?
We probably should think of one.
We didn't even think of critiquing.
Oh my god, we don't have anything. We don't have a single critique.
Like, it's not a perfect story, you know? Like,
no, it's not.
I'm sure there are plot holes and things that don't perfectly align and connect.
Again, like I said, we can treat this as a critique for the sake of the pod, but you do need to have some suspension of disbelief. And if you're the type to just like be like, but what's realistic? Then, you know, maybe it's just not the story for you, and that's totally fine. Like, it's totally fine. But I think for what it set out to do, it did really, really well.
I agree.
So I love Makoto Shinkai, and I can't wait to see what he does next. I like Weathering With You a lot, but I can't wait to see what he does next.
You know, and it might be a complete failure, but that's just the nature
that's
of
totally fine if he wants to like
things.
Yeah, exactly.
If he wants to experiment.
To do something completely left field, he wants to do a horror.
Oh my gosh.
I was actually talking with my brother about this, and it would be interesting to see him do a film that doesn't have any romance in it, or a romance that's not at the center of the story. I would be very interested to see a Shinkai film about that.
Interesting. Right. Oh, but he does romance so well.
He does.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you for listening. We know it wasn't easy. Sorry, I forgot my tagline for a second. Oh my gosh. But yes, thank you for making it this far. Please find us wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be on Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube. Also, follow us on Twitter at Into the Workshop. We'll see you guys next time for our next episode, which is going to be interesting. Bye!
Bye.
See ya!